I'll be glad I got patience.
Man, the middle. I went down, oh, way down there, brother. Way down to the left.
Board's not gonna start till next week. Another year going on.
Yeah,
And they ain't changed, they still as disorganized as they always are.
somebody teaching schools administration.
We're about 30 days before we get down below 100. 30 days, that's not soon. It goes by in a hurry.
That's called right around the corner.
Yeah.
You're right, we didn't go.
Don't deal with that. They have to wait.
We didn't have any air conditioning in school. Barely had, we had,
You're right. Air conditioning with the window.
yeah, one heater, it was up in that corner up there. You got to look into it, you felt it.
Say swamp cooler, these kids wouldn't know what swamp coolers are.
That's what we had.
Yeah, the one in my garage, it's called porta cool.
Those things are nice too. I mean, compared to.
Compared to nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that turned on,
Then
get
get
that
right
water
on it.
going, and it just, it feels 20 degrees, so it's there.
You get Ray one of them.
Oh, for his garage work,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, he's up and about. Come in, Mr. E.
All right.
I messed up, man. I messed up.
Oh, you're talking about the whole. I'll send you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the opportunity to gather together as a family. Father, be with us in our studies tonight. May we gain the wisdom from your word that we need. Father, we pray your blessings upon the sick in the congregation. Give them the comfort, your health, as you see fit. Father, be with this nation as it goes through turbulent times. Father, we pray that the leaders of this country will always look to you, that they'll consider your word, consider your wisdom and not theirs. Father, forgive us of our sins. This is our prayer in Jesus' name.
Okay, we're actually. Always perfectly in harmony. Oh, that's better. I was wondering, right? Every other church always perfectly in harmony, right, Seth? Never a problem. I knew that. Well, there is one little issue going on. Now, to this point, the mission team has always been who? Paul and Barnabas. Although to this point, most of the time it was Barnabas and Paul. It was just a gradual transition where Paul just kind of gradually moved to front center. So it shifted to Paul and Barnabas. But you would have thought by reading the first few chapters that they were going to be inseparable. And they almost were, except for this. Now, last week we talked about the Jerusalem conference there in Acts 15. They're getting ready to go back to work. Let's see. Well, back up to verse 30 of chapter 15. They get the letter. We've got the finding, the conclusion of the conference, and it's signed off by the elders and the apostles, and they take it back to Antioch. Verse 30. When they were sent off, Paul and Barnabas and a couple of others, when they were sent off, they came to Antioch. When they gathered the multitude together, they delivered the letter. Now, the last the church at Antioch had heard, remember, was they'd had an issue going on. Some Judaizing teachers had come up from Jerusalem, had begun to insist that all the Gentiles become circumcised. And so when Paul and Barnabas left Antioch and were sent off to get this all worked out, I'm sure Antioch was one of those kind of on pins and needles waiting to hear, okay, how's this going to work out? Now, I say that. Antioch seems to be an exceptional church, but I'm sure they were eagerly anticipating getting to hear, because they couldn't click on Facebook and follow the proceedings at the Jerusalem conference and know what the conclusion was. They had to wait till everybody gets back. So that's what's going on. They deliver the letter, verse 31 of Acts 15. When they'd read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas, themselves being prophets also, exhorted and strengthened the brethren with many words. And after they'd stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. Now, depending on your translation, do you have verse 34? How many people have a verse 34 in Acts 15? Okay, but they won't all, because 34 is not found in the oldest Greek manuscripts. It says, however, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. That's not found in the oldest, and that's one of the reasons that if you don't have it, it'll be down in the footnote, or it'll be set off to the side or something like that, just making sure everybody's on the same page. Verse 35 says, Paul and Barnabas also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord, with many others also. But if 34 wasn't there, that would mean that Judas and Silas went back to Jerusalem, which is kind of odd considering what's about to happen. Okay, verse 36. Getting ready to start the second missionary journey. It says, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Based on Paul's suggestion, their itinerary should have been, go back to our air map here. Here's Antioch. Here's Cyprus. Here's Pamphylia. They would have traveled to Cyprus like they did on the first missionary journey, and then up to Pamphylia, and then made that little crescent moon back over to Iconium and Lystra and Derbe. That basically is the way it sounds like Paul was setting it out if they were going to retrace their steps. That's not going to be the way that it works, because, verse 37, Barnabas was determined to take with them John, called Mark. Now, John Mark's one of those interesting characters from the New Testament, and he pops up at some of the doggonedest places. The first place most people believe Mark shows up is when the young man is following after they've arrested Jesus, and the soldiers go to grab him and get a hold of his clothes, and he runs off naked. And a lot of scholars feel like that's actually Mark in the story, even though he doesn't tell his name. But John Mark, he started out on the first missionary journey. He made it all the way to Cyprus, made it up to Pamphylia, and then he turned around and went home for whatever reason we don't know. So for the rest of, and for most of the congregations that they established in that first journey, John Mark was not a part of their missionary team. So that sets the stage for what I still consider a surprising turn of events. Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Then the contention became so sharp. Now, you remember how chapter 15 began? The Pharisaic Christians had gone up to Antioch, and they'd preached that the Gentiles had to be circumcised. And what did that produce there at the church in Antioch? No, before we get to that, yeah. You had serious conflict. Paul and well, if Galatians 2 is talking about the same event, Paul's kind of on his own because even Barnabas is carried away with Peter and the rest of them. If that's the same event, we talked about that last week. But it produced this tremendously sharp contention. Now, by the time they leave Antioch and head for Jerusalem, Paul and Barnabas are rock solid again. And as far as we can tell, Peter is too. But they get to Jerusalem, and bang, there's more contention. The Pharisaical party of Pharisaical Christians stand up, and they're going at it head to head. And the description Luke puts in there, it's not a pleasant, easy debate. It's sharp, right?
Is a negative thing concerning the church.
Just throw that wrinkle in there for me. It's not always, no. Can God use contention for the best? Yes. Huh? He always does. Does that mean that's his preference? I saw a hand over here. Kelly, did you raise your hand? Got to be careful. You got to be careful. Somebody moved. Okay. I agree.
Is what I'm saying. There's twice as much area covered now.
Yes,
This
God
is what I'm
produces.
saying.
Yes, God produces good out of the bad. Does that mean the contention God's happy with?
They're a lesson.
I agree, but the no but is the answer to my question. That's what I was talking about. Paul and Barnabas to this point have been almost inseparable. And it started because Barnabas is just a guy who is given to grace. I'm telling you, this guy just floods it. He's the one who welcomed Paul, got him accepted by the church in Jerusalem, and he's operating well within his norm here with John Mark, right? Now, yes, John Mark's a relative. Even if he wasn't, I'm sorry, I think Barnabas would have been right there going, Paul, give me a break. Out of this whole thing, again, I'm not saying contention always produces bad things, but I don't think for a minute the Lord was happy with this particular interaction. That's just the way I would read it. But that's a good question. Now you got me thinking on it. Steve?
Consciously disagree.
Okay, come on.
Well, the contention was not on Scripture. It was not on doctrine. It was not on. It was not personal, as in this is a bad person. It was on. It was about methodology.
Okay.
How will this missionary journey be the most successful? And the disagreement was on this person will help us be more successful. No, this person won't be. And if we can't argue amongst each other, then usually the strongest personality wins, not necessarily the person that has the best idea.
Okay. So who wins? In this one.
God won on this one.
God wins. If we let him, he'll win in every situation.
Doesn't mean God wasn't pleased about it.
Okay. But read how Luke described it. The contention became so sharp. You're talking about Christian brothers that are supposed to be role models for the church, right? Can you imagine Luke writing this about the 12 with Jesus? The contention became so sharp. How are you going to paint that in a way that God's not displeased with it? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's just,
And I may be just reading this. I'll admit, I've got my take on this. So go ahead.
about how to build the next building.
Okay.
There's not a right or wrong. They didn't cuss each other out. There was not sin involved in their contention. It was simply a sharp disagreement. I have had that in my life, and after that sharp disagreement, I did not attend any more men's business meetings. I'm sure you're all shocked about that. Those men that came and talked to me did not sin. I don't think that I sinned. Was there contention? Yes, there was. There was disagreement in the business meeting. There was disagreement about what was taking place. That I don't see why I can't go. I don't see why I need to be quiet. I don't see they were telling me that okay, then I won't go. And I don't know if that was a godly result, but I don't think it was sinful in that we had a disagreement. We had disagreement in a bylaws committee.
I'm not saying the disagreement is sinful. I'm saying the sharp contention and separation, even though God worked it for good, I have a hard time believing that Doug and Sherry are going to have a sharp contention. Neither one of them is going to be wrong necessarily, but when they leave, wait a minute, huh? Hang on. But when they leave here, they're going to go two different ways.
In a marriage, that's completely different. In this, both of them left to go serve God.
I know they went to serve God. Doug and Sherry both going on missionary journeys.
Barnabas leave.
That's something we don't know. The contention becomes so sharp that they separate. Wait a minute. Based on the text, they are never recorded together again. There is nothing that indicates they ever mended whatever happened here. And the sharp contention language indicates it rose to a level that did not fit what they were about to do. We're getting ready to go make more Christians. But first, let's fight this out and let's separate.
You're taking it to a place where Scripture doesn't say that we should take it there. I think that when Paul says, bring John Mark with you, to me, that's a strong
Paul
indication.
finally does, yes. He finally does. I have no question. In my mind, when Paul makes that statement, he's admitting, you know what? I was too hard on him the first time. And Barnabas was right because Barnabas showed him grace. Now, that's how I read that.
Angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun go down in your anger. I cannot see him. I think your definition of sharp contention is not biblical.
Okay, that's fair. I would like to research that.
Because it does not talk about it being sinful. And the Bible is so honest.
Yes, the Bible's very honest.
That it records Jesus calling Peter Satan. It even in the book that Peter narrated to Mark. He still tells on himself.
Yes.
And it's honest. It calls out the faults in anybody.
Yes.
And if this was a fault of Paul or Barnabas, it would call it out. A sharp contention simply means it was an intense argument.
Yeah.
This is a teaching point, the way I look at it.
Okay.
And it's not like the church was never going to have any kind of disagreement between its
I
members.
agree.
And this is how do you handle it? If it's that sharp, separate.
Yeah. And I'm reading it differently than you are. Let me take it one step further, and then I'll at the end of the day, yes, we can disagree on it, right? And we're fine either way, because that's how I read it. As chapter 15 opens, Luke is talking about a sharp dispute between the Judaizing teachers who were Christians, who were trying to force circumcision on the Gentiles. Was that just a sharp disagreement that had no bearing on right or wrong, good or bad? And I'm just saying this. We're dealing with the same chapter, the same writer, and he's using much the same language. When he's dealing with Paul versus the Judaizing teachers, and then when they get to Jerusalem and there's this heated debate. That one seems to be pretty clear that wasn't what God had in mind for it. That's not the way he wanted it handled. The church finally does, but those that went in and caused trouble in Antioch, well, they had a heated disagreement and heated argument. They could even back theirs up with Scripture. That's why I read this same dissension as, or separation, that's why I read this in the same terms. That'll explain where I come from on it. When I read this, I can't help but feel the Lord would have much preferred they handle this a different way. Probably taking John Mark. But is he able to produce good from it? No question. But Barnabas is suddenly gone from the story. His absence, for me, speaks volumes because he has been such a dynamic part of this. Yes.
We, all of us, need to be careful about adding to what the Scripture says. Because I feel like it's being added to.
And that I don't want to do. I'm telling you how I read it. That's what I read in the story. Barnabas is still being painted in a very positive picture. I don't think Paul's being painted that positively. But that being said, we can disagree on that. And I will allow that we can have a difference on that. We can. Right? Right? Okay.
I think whatever happened back there was so serious that Paul took a firm stand against it.
He does say first steps, no question. Okay. That's fine, we can read it differently. I don't think so, but
Peter was arrested and released miraculously.
Right.
He went to John Mark's mother's house in Jerusalem, and all the disciples were gathered there. And it seems to me that this house was probably bigger than most to accommodate that big crowd. And maybe, and I'm just conjecturing here, maybe John Mark was a little bit spoiled, maybe missed Mama. Maybe wasn't as mature as he would be later.
and Paul wanting to be more mature. Sure. Yes, no question.
And again, we can read it differently, and I'd never want to add to. Okay? That's my response to the way Luke records it. In my mind, that's trying to stay consistent. That's all I'm saying. Okay? Because I don't want to do that. I really don't. You know me well enough to know I try and steer clear of that, right? Right, Steve? Yes, I do try and steer clear of that. Okay, Barbara. Okay, good.
That whole chapter was because there was a fuss about the Judaizers wanting people to be circumcised.
Right.
And yet in chapter 16.
Now, don't spoil it.
Don't be a spoiler because I'm going there. I really am. Because I really want to talk about that. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's finish 15. Yes, sir. No. He produced good out of it. Yes.
Agreed.
And often think, where do we see the Lord still working after, I've been part of a congregation, sharp disagreements. And when it's separate ways, it's still fellowship, special occasions, but there was one building a few miles away from the other. Okay? Both were. So, and we'll say at one time the plan of the original work, once they got to a certain size, was to plant another church. It didn't happen. I'm like, well, it happened, the Lord may do something. Perhaps. It just seems like sometimes when things happen that aren't good, and they may not be good for the individual, people or person people are good for them. But it caused things that the Lord would work through. And His will would still come regardless of the stumbling.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
So that's why I read that and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, because I had
Finished reading the story. We got stuck on the contention, right? But God does produce good things. And John Mark is still an integral part of the story. The farther you go, so Barnabas definitely is blessing and helping mature John Mark, however that worked, and he'll be back in the story. Okay, so Barnabas took Mark, sailed to Cyprus, verse 39, 40. Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. And so now, and Luke is focused on Paul. That may be the whole reason that the rest of that vein is not pursued. His focus is on Paul. Paul's back up in the crescent, and he's going to continue going forward. Now, Barbara was being a spoiler. Before we start chapter 16, flip back over to Galatians 2, where we were last week for a minute. Galatians chapter 2, if we're talking about the same event, says, start in verse 1. After 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, also took Titus with me. I went up by revelation and communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. So, that's what you were going to be a spoiler about, right? Because chapter 16 opens with not Titus, but the other, Timothy, right? Now, Titus, we know, he's never mentioned in the book of Acts, at least not by name, and so he's kind of he's not part of Luke's focus. But Acts 16 starts with these words. Verse 1, Paul's traveling back up apparently by land up into this sliver that he worked with and helped establish churches there. It says he came to Derbe and Lystra. Behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek. He was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted to have him go on with him, and he took him and what? Circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. Now, what was your question? Why?
They, the elders or whatever in Jerusalem saying, why should a non-Jew be circumcised, or anybody who's becoming a Christian that's not been circumcised be circumcised, because that's the old law.
Right.
And he just turns right around and makes Timothy get circumcised because his father hadn't allowed to be one.
I've always read this as a website,
Okay.
okay? He didn't go to him and say, you have to. He was doing it because, they didn't have bathrooms like we did. So they could tell, in a public restroom.
Okay, good. I did not know where you were going with that, right? Thank you.
Argument when it came to the Jews that he was preaching to. There was no argument.
Right.
No opportunity for it. And that's what I think he was doing. He goes, we're not doing it because of the law. We're doing it because we're doing God's work, and we need to remove that argument.
And why was that important?
Because of what Paul's Catholic was.
Which was?
Go to the synagogues.
Yeah. To the Jew first, and to the
He
Jew.
rejected because
To all men be all.
Become all things to all men. Timothy wasn't being circumcised to be saved. But in order to be effective and not produce unnecessary opposition. I mean, Paul's going to
Face enough opposition without any help. It's just the way the jealous Jews in the synagogues reacted.
But because Timothy was half Jewish, and because he should have already been circumcised when he was born, according to their law, before he become a Christian, because they're new converts, as far as we can tell, and because the Jews knew, apparently, that he wasn't. That would have given them some ground to stir up unnecessary hostility toward the message of the gospel. Now, and I don't think he forces Timothy. It does say he took him and circumcised him. I really think Timothy was on board with this. I don't see anything in the text that doesn't say that. But yes, the circumstances are very different just because Titus is a Gentile, total Gentile. That was the whole argument of Acts 15. Total Gentiles did not have to be circumcised. I don't think Paul would argue that Timothy had to be circumcised to be saved. I don't think for a moment that is why he's doing. As far as we can tell, it says because of the Jews who were in that region. They were watching for anything they could accuse him about. And from what I can tell, Paul's whole approach was, Russ, you pointed it out, be all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. That seems to be and it seems to be the reason that Luke records the two things right there together, to make sure we see the whole story here going on. When it came to Gentiles, pure Gentiles that were not of Jewish lineage, no, circumcision had no place for them. Timothy, there was room to make an argument. Yes, sir.
Timothy's message, the Jews would accept his teaching more than
They would have accepted
Timothy's teaching more, the Jews would have anyway, because he was circumcised, showing a respect. As far as we can tell, Titus and Timothy both were, at least by the time the letters are written to them, they're both leaders. I mean, Titus is entrusted with appointing elders. So they are both leaders. Titus would have probably been, I'm assuming, exclusively Gentile focused, just because I can't see Jews giving a Gentile a hearing in their synagogue. Can't see that. For Timothy to stand in that synagogue and at least get a hearing, he's going to have to. There wasn't anywhere around that. And it removes that out. No, I really think, I think he's on board with that. Huh? Yes, I know, Tommy, but if you knew that was the only way you could do what God wanted you to do, you'd probably take a different approach. I think, right? Yes, sir. They seem to be, yes, they seem to appear differently and recognizable. When the Samaritans would see the Jews, they seemed to be able to know they were Jews instantly. I would think so. But Luke says specifically, it's because the Jews in that region, they know Timothy. They know his parents' situation. And so, if nothing else, they knew him very clearly. And they were not going to be receptive to him until he was showing that respect, removing that obstacle. I can't speak for the rest of the Roman world. I assume they dress differently, but I won't guarantee that. I can't, I don't know what they were like in Corinth or Athens or whatever, but we assume so. Okay, what do you mean? There might have been, but again, we really can't nail that down. I mean, we assume certain things along those lines, but it's very difficult to know and be able to say, yeah, I can show you pictures taken back in, first century Athens. We just kind of have to work from what we have. But we assume, yes, that there is a visible difference that would mark them or set them apart. Right.
And they were different. And they lived in a community where people knew them. They knew them. And they knew they're different.
Yes, behavior.
Relations, those things, yes. far as we can tell, yeah.
Anyway, so he had the teaching. It was just like, okay, we gotta get you in here so you can make
Yeah, so you can close the deal, so to speak. Yes, by their behavior, their relations, their standards. In those ways, yes, the Jews stood out. I just can't address whether or not their dress instantly identified them. I assume it did, but I can't prove that part. One thing to keep in mind, one of the reasons that the Jews of Judea and Jerusalem looked down on what we would refer to as the Hellenists, which Timothy falls in that category, is because the Jews in Judea felt like the Hellenists did not adhere to the customs as closely, probably including the dress, some of the other things. They felt like they were, they compromised with the world in which they lived, the Greek world. That could have affected their dress not being as distinctive. You know, if we were talking about in Jerusalem and you were talking about, let's say, the Pharisees, buddy, you could spot them a mile off, no question. It gets harder to identify when you're now 200 plus miles away from Jerusalem and you're in the Hellenistic world. Okay, what changes in their dress and behavior compared to back there? There, I can tell you, yeah, you could see them, no question. But I just can't say for sure on that. But yes, you would know them by their behavior, their Sabbath laws, their dietary laws, synagogue attendance, and as far as we can tell, Timothy was scrupulous except for circumcision, and that might have been because Dad wouldn't let him until this point. So, yes, ma'am. I'm not answering that question, not even getting into that. It was a priest, but even at a synagogue, I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. They weren't qualified by the law, but
priest plan, but doesn't seem, at least that is not, circumcision is continued to this day.
Yes.
They don't have priests.
Not that you verify, so I can't answer that. We assume it was,
let's say the leader of the synagogue, rabbi, who did the circumcision. I agreed. But for the Jews to be satisfied, it still would have had to had some representation. Otherwise, how would they know it even happened? They know Timothy. They know he's not circumcised. Suddenly, they know he is. Okay, if it wasn't done in some semblance of the accepted order, they still wouldn't accept him. So that's a great question. I have no way of answering that, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a priest at the temple. Beyond that, yes, sir. Yeah, she did. Of course, that wasn't the law of Moses either, but yeah, she did. And as I recall, she wasn't too happy about it either. You're now a husband of blood to me. Okay, yeah, that was. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on that. We didn't even, and you're going to ring the bell, I know. Let's at least finish this section. We know Timothy does. And Luke seems to record the two stories, not only because they happen so close together, but to make a point and to reveal that the Acts 15 over circumcision for Gentiles, that was a separate issue in the sense that there was no basis for Gentile circumcision. Timothy, there was at least an argument as far as effectiveness and removing unnecessary obstacles for the spread of the gospel. But beyond that, that would be the only reason to do it. Okay, so let's finish reading at least this section. We're going to have to stop before we go any further. But verse 3, it says Paul wanted to have him go on with him. He took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the decrees to keep, which were determined by the apostles and elders at Jerusalem. So even after circumcising Timothy, they're still spreading the results of the Jerusalem conference about Gentiles don't have to be circumcised. Plus. Yes. Actually, it wasn't part of the message, was the letter. Blood. Strangled. Right. And
You do that, you're doing good. That's right. It was encouraging.
to them. Yes, whereas what they probably would have been getting mixed messages from the Jews who hadn't joined in anyway, and I bet those Jewish Christians that were brand new Christians in Derbe and Lystra and Iconium, I bet they had to struggle with that because they wouldn't have had clear direction on that. And it will continue to plague the church for a considerable period of time. Interestingly, those churches, depending on which region of Galatia Paul is writing to, those might have been the primary churches to whom he writes the letter to the Galatians. Now, I've seen arguments that it was actually further up in that same region. I don't know. End of the day, I'm not sure you can come down on it. But that should have been at least part of the churches that Paul writes the letter to that we know as Galatians, likely along about the same time. Did I finish it? Oh, verse 5. The churches were strengthened in the faith and increased in number daily. And Paul he's retraced this crescent moon journey, and now he's going to continue to push on, and that's where we'll wind up in verses 6 and following, but we're going to stop there. Okay. But technically, the second missionary journey has started. So
of you guys who are not aware, me and Susan Gann have a competition. I think she's probably trying a little bit harder than I am potentially on winning this competition, but which one of the classes can get out fastest, whether it's the ladies class or the teen class, you're welcome, Warren. I get the ladies out here like 10 minutes faster than they used to, so boom. That was my plan all along. But hope everybody's doing well tonight. But if you were here 2 weeks ago, we were discussing this idea of cross references in the Bible, right? And kind of showed you guys a super fancy graph with lots of colorful lines on it, pointing out the, 63,000, over 63,000 cross references in the Bible. And we discussed about that and kind of how it shows, I think, the legitimacy of our faith and the truth of our faith to both us and other people. Also, before I go on to further, who has singing tonight? Oh, what number? 122. Awesome. I'm glad I remember that. 122, if you guys want to turn over there before we keep going. But so we talked about that 2 weeks ago, and I kind of wanted to continue this discussion of cross-references by pulling from what I think one of the most important cross-references in the Bible is. And this cross-reference is not how we typically think of cross-references, right? Most cross-references go as a reference from a future point referencing the earlier point. Cool thing about the Bible is there's these things called prophecies that, God would let his prophets know, hey, this is what's coming, so they could prophesize this is what's coming in the future, which I think are some of the greatest cross-references and the most proving points of the cross-references. And so when talking about prophecies, there's one book that we always turn to, and that is Isaiah. So if you guys want to turn over to Isaiah chapter 53, we'll pretty much be going through the full chapter, verses 2 through 12. But I think this is one of the most important prophecies in the Bible because it foretells the coming of a very important person who's going to be called the Messiah, the Christ, right? And so Isaiah chapter 53, starting in verse 2, it says this: He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our own transgressions. He was crushed for our own iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we were healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and to cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and he will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied by his knowledge. My righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercessions for the transgressors. Right? We know who this chapter is talking about. We know that this chapter is talking about Jesus, right? It's foretelling the coming of the Messiah and what he is going to do during his time. And this isn't the only foretelling of the Messiah, right? We know there are many more sprinkled throughout the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah, a few more sprinkled throughout there. And I was having this conversation with my friend, I think it was Sunday night, and we were talking about what I'm going to point out here in a second. And it was really funny because we were talking about it, and I was like, hey, I think I'm actually going to do a lesson on this. So it kind of pointed me in this direction. But the question was, why didn't the Jews believe in Jesus? You know, they had all of this information about the coming of the Messiah, but when Jesus actually showed up to the scene, they rejected him, and they still reject him. Why? And there's a few different reasons that we can get into, but there's one that I want to get into tonight. And the one that I want to focus on tonight is their preconceived notions about what the Messiah was going to be like. So if you've watched The Chosen, you've seen this play out visually, but back in the time of the Roman Empire and the Jews, there was this belief among the Jews that the Messiah was going to come. He was going to be this great and fantastic warrior. He was going to destroy the Roman Empire. He was going to be a great political leader and reestablish Israel on this earth, right? He was going to reestablish his kingdom on this earth. And so when Jesus came and said, no, that's not my desire. My desire is to create a spiritual kingdom. That is what the prophecies were foretelling. It wasn't a physical kingdom. This world's going to be destroyed. I don't care about it. I want you guys in heaven with me. I want the spiritual kingdom. The Jews saw that and couldn't get around their preconceived notions. They couldn't get around their desires and wants because they had a very strong desire for the Roman Empire to be completely destroyed. They did not like them. So they said, this man cannot be the Messiah. This man cannot be the Christ because he's not doing what we wanted or expected or thought he was going to do. And so they rejected him. And I think so many times as Christians, and especially in Christian culture, we think to ourselves, I'm not saying we do too, I think we do in some ways, we think to ourselves, man, how can they be so dumb, right? Have we ever had that thought of the Jews of that time? And they're like, man, with all the evidence you had to support Jesus, the coming of Jesus, and all the evidence that he gave you during his ministry, I've had that thought before. Like, man, you guys are blind. How do you not see it? How do you not read through Isaiah and see what's coming? And we have these thoughts. But I think we as a Christian culture, and again, I'm not saying we do it here, but we as a Christian culture, haven't we done something very similar? Right? Because we have a prophecy for our age, right? It's called the second coming, right? Jesus is coming back, judgment day, salvation. And haven't we taken our own preconceived notions, our wants and desires, and said, this is what that's going to look like, or this is what you have to do to obtain it? You know, we, again, I'm not saying we do it here, but as Christian culture has done it extremely well, is we've started to put our own desires into what that's going to look like. A couple things, you know, everyone gets to go to heaven no matter who you believe in. Right, that's a big one that's taken off right now. No matter who you worship, no matter who you have a relationship with, no matter what God you serve, right, you're going to heaven. You're saved. It's one that's being preached right now. Another one, you get to go to heaven even if you're living a life of sin with no regard to change and improve. Right? You know, no matter what lifestyle you're living, you know, I know we all live a life of sin. We all are guilty of that, but living a lifestyle that has no desire of change or improvement or bettering ourselves, nah, you're fine. Continue living that lifestyle. Jesus has got you. You're going to heaven too. Last one I kind of thought of, baptism is not necessary for salvation. And there are many more, but these things that we pull from are not just our own wants and desires, but are contrary to what Christ has told us, what we have been told about the second coming, but we have our wants and our desires and our preconceived notions on how Christ is going to act, even though he might have told us how he's going to act, but that's not Christ, right? And we've gone in and we've done exactly what the Jews did at their time. We allowed our preconceived notions to affect how we have seen what has been in biblical texts. And so all I wanted to do tonight is I just wanted to point that out. And I wanted to warn us to be careful. Because this did not work for the Jews, and I guarantee you it will not work for us. So be very careful about throwing our own wants and desires when we read biblical text. Take Jesus at his word. Don't add your own words into it. It's being done a lot right now. Be careful when you're listening to someone that is adding their own words into biblical text. It's a very dangerous game to play, so don't play it. One of the things that has been said is to reach and achieve salvation, we must go to Jesus. We must be living a life committed to him. And so if you're living a life that you haven't committed to Jesus yet, and you are ready to do so tonight, won't you come as we stand and sing?
Christ's blessings on my head I have made my own. I will hide it in my heart that it never may depart. It shall rule there alone. The love of God within the heart, the kindliness and warmth impart. The soul will glow like Jesus in his tender mercy. If the heart is made his dwelling place, the love of God goes like a flame. Through endless years it is the same. The love of God will never fail nor lose its glory till we see him face to face. Since the Son of God came down with his love our lives to crown, he with us would remain. Greater love there could not be. Jesus died for you and me. In our hearts he would reign. The love of God within the heart, the kindliness and warmth impart. The soul will glow like Jesus in his tender mercy. If the heart is made his dwelling place, the love of God was like a flame. Through endless years it is the same. The love of God will never fail nor lose its glory till we see him face to face. While his love bursts true and bright, we are walking in the light. He has shown us the road. We his glory must reflect, lest our dimness and neglect keep some soul from its God. The love of God within the heart, the kindliness and warmth impart. The soul will glow like Jesus in his tender mercy. If the heart is made his dwelling place, the love of God was like a flame. Through endless years it is the same. The love of God will never fail nor lose its glory till we see him face to face.
Something coming this weekend, don't you? Oh, yeah, you're going to go down to Lampasas. Keep them all in your prayers, but we are sure the van is up to snuff now. So that's a good thing. Under the youth news, the Alvarado Independent School District Meet the Teacher Night is August 14th. School starts August 17th. What happened to summer? It just flew by. Also, sign-up sheets for Feed the Teens will be in the foyer soon. When do we start that? September? Okay. And if you'd like to sign up to host a first Sunday small group, let Jake know. So that covers all of our youth. Other announcements. August 20th will be a ladies' luncheon and craft. Bring a dish to share. More details coming soon. See Cassidy with any questions. And also on the 20th, and I didn't know this until today, we'll meet at the church at 3 p.m., and then we're going to drive over to the Ashbrook home for a singing for Margaret and Aaron. So I hope you can come be a part of that. Men's dove hunt, October 5th through 8th. Perry, any details? How far away is it? Do you know? Burke Burnett. Okay, good. Oh, cool. Okay, good, super. Just one thing for August will be deodorant. And Mark, you said y'all are going to go to Love and Light this tomorrow or this week? And okay, good. And then Lisa put a special note in here. Bob Burris is going to turn 90 on September 7th. And Lisa would like to get 90 birthday cards sent to him. So if you want to be a part of that, she's got his address. She even offers postage. She said, just let me know. She'd like to have him get 90 birthday cards. So I think that'd be swell. Okay, that's all the announcements on that. Let's see what we've got on this. Carolyn Curitan is home from rehab, so that's good news. And Barbara's cataract surgery, everything's spunky. Okay. We found out, and it was announced Sunday, we talked to Judy again today. She's having spinal fusion, Judy Maxwell, having spinal fusion surgery and removing some discs on August 15th at Medical City in Fort Worth. And it says something about there's a titanium plate in her neck that she had put in some time back, and it's moved. And if she doesn't have this done pretty quick, it could be, she could get paralyzed. So keep them in your prayers. Karen Johnson is supposed to begin chemotherapy on Friday. Scott Knox had surgery Sunday to reinsert his feeding tube, and he's been in the hospital in Walls fighting an infection. They've got that under control. He said that according to yesterday. But he also had another surgery today for an abscess. So surgery went well, and he's back in his room. Should be in there another couple of days. Let's see. Brendan Rivera had spinal fusion yesterday. Okay. Okay. Well, if you hear anything new, let us know. And then Ronnie Hammondtree had surgery Sunday to remove a brain tumor. Oh, I saw this. Candy posted it. They were supposed to get married next month, and they found a lemon-sized tumor in his brain. Anyway, keep Ronnie and his fiancée in your prayers. They're awaiting biopsy results on that. And then we've had these added. Phil Barger, whose brother-in-law, okay, is having a heart scan, and he's having some issues. So keep him in your prayers. Also, Irene Keller, I'm sorry, that's right. Second degree burns to face, chest, and arms. Bless her heart. Okay, yeah, we need to be remembering that. And I think we ought to be keeping folks in prayer dealing with the fires, especially the firefighters. Have you had to fight any grass fires? I heard you were in the stockyards fighting one the other day. Thank you for your... I cannot imagine doing that at this temperature. Bless your heart. Anybody else we need to add? Okay, let's stand. Kelly, how about dismissing us tonight?
Father, thanks so much for any blessings that you give to us. And the blessing of being able to be here until this week, to be able to study your word, to be able to gather with our brothers and sisters. Father, the prayer list was lengthy tonight. Father, you know each need. We just pray for healing for each one of those. Pray that you would be with those that are attending to them, doctors, nurses, others that are involved. We just pray for full healing for them. We pray to be with those that are badly fired right now. Be with those families that are impacted by that. Father, we pray to be with those that are on the line fighting those fights. We pray to be with us that have drifted the rest of this week.